You are listening to the Air Raid Hour with host Judge Mathis, dog, Tilt Money, dog, presented by the fine folks over at the Cover One Sports Network, dogs. Bills Mafia, let's go!
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour Cover One pregame show presented by Picasso's Pizza. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis, joined today by co-host of the Going Deep podcast, Kevin Masseri. You can find him on Twitter at Kevin Masseri. And I'll tell you what, today the 6-2 Buffalo Bills face off with the 7-1 Minnesota Vikings in balmy Orchard Park. Vikings riding a 6-game winning streak. Bills coming off a disappointing loss to the Jets. There are a ton of storylines heading into this week. Keenum and Diggs returning, playing against the Vikings after the Minnesota Miracle. You got Stefon Diggs, Justin Jefferson after that trade. You got Josh Allen's elbow, which we'll get to in a moment. Harrison Phillips return to Orchard Park. Delvin versus James Cook. Leslie Frazier and Xavier Rhodes getting a little bit of a Minnesota Vikings revenge game. But all of those are overshadowed by what I mentioned previously, and that's Josh Allen's elbow and the Buffalo Bills. Kevin, we were talking about this in the Cover One chat. I don't know if you had a chance to see this yet. Do you see the mind games the Bills are even playing in warmups this morning? What do you have? What are your thoughts on the mind games the Bills are continuing to play this morning in pregame warmups?
Just when I thought there was just no deliberate mind games, I was pretty convinced the Bills were just doing what was best for them. I don't know what's going on here this morning as we approach an hour to kickoff. And just quite frankly, it has to be, he might be getting some pain medication. Yeah. I still live by the feeling of there's no way you're one play away with him and you feel comfortable in that situation, but you don't have it giving him in most situations of starting him. I can't buy into that. And I think that's reckless. So I do think it's something pain related. Maybe he didn't feel good coming in today.
When he gave that thumbs up, the arch of the elbow, he just sort of strained it a little bit, maybe.
He woke up with, slept on it wrong or was doing something around that, like in the locker room, and it didn't feel great. And they're like, well, let's sit on it. I don't know, man. This is interesting. It's one of the more interesting scenarios I've seen.
And if that is truly what happened, that's malpractice on the Bills' part for not having Matt Barkley there and active. So for those of you who don't know what we're talking about right now, I probably should have prefaced this better. The Buffalo Bills came out for pregame warmups, their typical pregame warmups, about an hour and a half before kickoff. And it was Case Keenum and Matt Barkley, who wasn't obviously dressed because he's not playing today, who were throwing to the receivers in warmups. Typically it would be Josh Allen with the starters and Case Keenum with the backups. Keenum rolled with the starters, and it was Matt Barkley, I'm assuming in shorts or something, that rolled with the backup. So there was no Josh Allen on the field, typically warming up with his teammates like he usually does. Cause of a lot of panic on Twitter. But then we have one of the Minnesota Vikings beat reporters. I'm not even going to try to, I'm going to butcher her name here. Aditi Kimbawala. Yeah. She says, Bills quarterback Josh Allen is indeed active. Well, there was only one other quarterback on the roster, but we are still waiting for him to come out on the field. Case Keenum and Matt Barkley, who hasn't been elevated off the practice squad, handled warm-up throws. One of Allen's unconcerned teammates just joked to me, he's milking the suspense. So if he truly does start this football game, like the Buffalo Bills just took, I think, mind games for who will and won't play to like a whole new level, like absolutely whole new level. With, I honestly think that John Scott video was staged. I think the Bills wanted one of those beat reporters to get that video. I think him not coming up for warmups, like I truly think the Buffalo Bills have taken these mind games for who is and who isn't playing to an absolute whole new level this week. It's been super obnoxious for I think us as fans, and it's been panic inducing for us as fans, but just imagine how the Minnesota Vikings probably feel trying to prepare for who's going to be at quarterback this week.
Yeah. I think they'd rather be caught off guard and have to play against Keenum than face Allen. I think I think that's a good surprise. And compared to the opposite of thinking it's Keenum and all of a sudden, snapping is Josh Allen. And all of a sudden you're like, we have to go with our other game plan that you can't have ready in a 3-day implementation period. So it's an interesting conundrum. I think it could be as easy as this is his planned medical procedure or maybe a painkiller or some version of something, sling, wrap, tape, something. medical offering in general. And this was always the plan, to limit the throws and warm up. No need to give those extra reps. He knows what he can do. And maybe you see him shortly in the final sets of pre-snaps, which is usually around, if I'm at the stadium, like 12:20 is usually around when they come back out. So that's the real tell. If he's not there for that's a wrap. If he is here in a half an hour, I do think that's a fairly good sign. I'm still if something was wrong or he couldn't go, I still think I know he is the second quarterback. I still think they inactivate him and then maybe still go with Tommy Sweeney, because at some point, if he can't go, you might as well have the tight end.
The inactive list is out.
Right.
So Josh Allen is active. So it's a little too late for that one now, because that comes out an hour and a half before pregame. So that should, to me, that's the tell. Like you mentioned it earlier. Why activate him if he's one snap away from playing? Why can't he just be playing? Like if you feel comfortable with him being one snap away, why can't he just play? Chris Kepner comes in and says, am I starting Josh in fantasy or no? I personally am not. So I have Josh in 3 leagues. In 2 leagues, I picked up Trevor Lawrence off the waiver wire. And in my dynasty league, it's a dual quarterback dynasty. I slid Justin Herbert into my starting quarterback spot, and I moved a wide receiver into my flex. So I'm personally not starting Josh Allen in fantasy today, because we're going to get to this in a little bit. I expect a ton of the running game today. I mean, the Bills activated 6 running backs for this game. We're going to get to that in a moment, but I mentioned a ton of storylines. You got Diggs and Jefferson. You've got Harrison Phillips returning to Orchard Park. You got Dalvin versus James Cook. And obviously you have Leslie Frazier and Xavier Rhodes with some revenge games this week as well. You even got KJ Osborne playing the slot for Minnesota, former UB/Miami wide receiver. What storyline outside of Josh Allen intrigues you the most heading into this football game?
Oh, there's a lot of good storylines. There really are randomly. I do think a good semi storyline is Tim Graham broke the Diggs story, and I think that's a pretty big storyline. Breaking down like every facet of that trade. But I think the best to me is the Cook brothers. I don't now that we know he's officially active, there are some worries there with Luke Johnson, what could happen, but that's an interesting storyline. 2 brothers playing against each other. Yes, it does happen. But at the same position, like you said, are they going to go run heavy today? I think there's a fair chance you see some of James Cook more than normal. And to the initial question of do you bench Josh Allen? I mean, I do. They have 6 running backs active. I think it's a matter of not using him anyways, even if he's going to go limit short, quick stuff. You might see a 15 for 20 for 205 yards if he goes, something like that. So I don't know that that's fantasy relevant anyways. But to me, man, the biggest storyline is I love the Cook stories. I think that's a really good storyline. And we'll see if they're able to bring up the UB connection with their slot receiver and KJ Osborne or not. I'd be impressed if they make that and don't just give him the Miami grad transfer card.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting for the for the whoever's broadcasting. I know it's on Fox. I think it might be Charles Davis and Ian Eagle. You know, when they go to KJ Osborne's transcripts or his stats, it probably just says Miami on the sheet. So whether they did their research to know if he transferred from Buffalo or not, that'll be a big test for Ian Eagle or Charles Davis to see if their statisticians can dig that one out. But the Bills inactive list, obviously Jordan Poyer, that elbow, we saw that this week. He is not playing. We're going to get to that in a moment because there's some interesting storylines around who maybe starts at strong safety after a rough week last week from Jaquan Johnson. Kyer Elam, Tre'Davious White are out. Xavier Rhodes is in. Gregory Rousseau is out. So that's another interesting storyline to follow, who starts at that left end position and how does that rotation work. Balon Spector is out, which is a little surprising to me given the weather and sort of his special teams acumen. Justin Murray is out with Spencer Brown coming back. Whether Spencer Brown starts today, who knows? That's something to talk about as well. And then Tommy Sweeney is inactive. So 6 running backs are active in this game. I personally think the reason why Duke Johnson was activated in this football game was to help the Buffalo Bills in the short to intermediate passing game, but he's not going to have any part of that. I think Duke Johnson's job today is to field kicks and to field punts, to allow Naheem Hines, to allow Isaiah McKenzie, and to allow Khalil Shakir, all those other guys whose minds are wrapped up in both special teams and offense, to focus solely on offense and to fix what is clearly I don't want to say broken, because I feel like the opportunities are there and Josh Allen isn't hitting it, but just a lack of comfortability. I'm screwing up my adjectives here, but there's just something off about the short to intermediate passing game. We have yet to really replace Cole Beasley in this offense. What do you expect today from Duke Johnson, Naheem Hines, Shakir McKenzie? Like, what do you expect in that whole sort of running back wide receiver situation, slot receiver situation?
What I noticed was Duke Johnson was actually utilized through preseason and in training camp a lot in the red zone. So look out for that, where the Bills are struggling right now, around a 50% conversion clip. They're, toward the bottom of the league in a lot of red zone statistics right now. So I do believe that you'll see some interesting procedures with Duke Johnson in the red zone. I also think you see they're weak against the slot. I mean, you have Chandon Sullivan, who really struggles against short, shifty running back / receivers. I do think that they run maybe we'll see about a 14 personnel or something if they're going to go a 2 slot receivers to take advantage of the fact that Cameron Dantzler is injured as well and on IR now. So that's a pretty big loss for them. And their DVOA on the road against the run is like 26th. So there's definitely some things to be said about the Minnesota defense on the road isn't just a random sample size. There is enough evidence there in advanced analytics that show they struggle. They struggle against the slot. Their secondary is beat up at times, and they're not playing super well. I do think that there's some matchup advantages there for the Bills, and I do think they want to get better in the red zone. Duke Johnson's there. And pass blocking, does he come in and take and alleviate some of the pressure and be the number one guy against potentially a pressure situation and help out, like you mentioned earlier, Spencer Brown? I do think that you see him in pass edge situations. And then that's an interesting point on special teams. Do they go in super wet conditions / whatever the weather might be, like a kickoff with a guy that was on the practice squad? If that's telling that he's that reliable, I mean, man, he should be on the active roster. if that's really if he's trusting in those situations, I'd like to make a roster spot for him. And I think the final point on Duke Johnson, here's a random point. Did another team want to claim him at some point this week? Did another team say, hey, we want to activate him to our active roster? And the Bills said, we're going to elevate him. We're going to give him a game check and we'll go from there. I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but it's something to consider in the back of your head.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's an interesting point you bring up about the comfortability. Like, if they feel most comfortable with him returning kicks and punts, that says a lot about what they think about their current kick and punt return units. And that's something to keep an eye on. Spencer Brown is back from that ankle injury. Do you expect that he starts today, or do you think he's going to be the swing tackle off the bench with David Quessenberry continuing to start today? The Bills have their hands full with Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith on the edge.
I think he starts today. I think you go with Spencer Brown. I think the injury occurred with Quessenberry last week, getting beat off the edge and not buying the time for Josh. I think that's the plan, and you'd like to put Q back into his normal swing role. I wouldn't be shocked either way. I think we'll probably see something from the starting O-line here shortly, but I do lean towards Spencer Brown. I do think he's who they want to get the snaps to. Quessenberry's good against the run, though. So if it is that run game plan that we've talked about, that might skew it a little bit. But if it's a little bit more pass heavy, I do think you'll see Spencer Brown. And that could be a slight tell too. Maybe not, but it could be a slight tell too, as Q's by far the run blocker. And you would think that Spencer Brown is more their pass blocking right tackle. So we'll see how that looks in pregame here shortly. But I do expect him to start. I do think that that's their anticipation. And I don't know that Q did enough to say, hey, it's my job when he's even healthy. If he's active, kind of similar to maybe Josh a little bit, I don't know that he goes to the swing tackle. And Spencer Brown, I do think you see him start. But if it is that run heavy set, I wouldn't be shocked, but I am thinking more towards Spencer Brown starting an every down right tackle.
Yeah. Looking at some of these other inactives, Shaq Lawson is my expectation to start at left end over Gregory Rousseau. I think he's maybe earned that. It's obviously a heavy rotation, so whoever starts doesn't really matter all that much. But who do you think gets the nod at left end with Gregory Rousseau missing this game with his ankle injury?
I like the Shaq Lawson guys. I think he's shown a lot. I think he shows a lot against the run. I think that particularly you're looking for him to be there and help with run fits against Alvin Cook. I think the cover 2 shell that Kirk Cousins struggles against historically, cover 2 high, that he's really poor against, I think the Bills feel pretty comfortable with. So I think that they are going to show a little bit more of a run stopping defense. I think that's Shaq Lawson. AJ Epinesa was poor in run last week, even though he does show the propensity to be good against the run. He wasn't last week. Missed some tackles, missed some plays. Was undisciplined. So will that work against him? I think it could. I do think you might see Shaq Lawson as the veteran presence there. But obviously, if you're looking at who might be the best overall, it might be Epinesa. But I don't know that's that razor. I think it's razor thin, and I think you might go to Shaq, who might be better against the run. That could be another tell on what they want to do up front, because they're going to rush 4 today, because that's how you beat Kirk Cousins.
And it'll be really interesting to see if, Von Miller's snap count significantly rises so they can rotate the other 3 at the left end position, right? So the whole key this year was, in the big games, we will play Von Miller more. In some of the lesser games, we might play him snap count less. This, I guess, would also be considered a big game with the Minnesota Vikings coming in with a better record at 7-1. So I expect a heavy workload for Von Miller today as well. And I think you'll see him given breathers, but I think the heavier rotation is going to come across from him on that left-hand side. And then last but not least, Jaquan Johnson drew the ire of most of Bills Mafia last week. Jordan Poyer is out again. My guess, after seeing that elbow, is he's probably going to be out for the significant future. The Buffalo Bills have to figure out what they're doing at that strong safety spot. Damar Hamlin has sort of, I don't want to say like replaced Micah Hyde, because that's ridiculous. He was an all-pro, but he's sort of filled in nicely for Micah Hyde at that free safety, split safety position. It's been replacing Jordan Poyer that has been an issue thus far this season. Jaquan Johnson in his 2 games has struggled. The Miami game, he gave up that huge touchdown late. And then obviously he was struggling with run fits last week. Do we see Dean Marlowe this week, or is it still too soon to get Dean Marlowe some action at strong safety?
I want to. I think Sean McDermott's going to go. I think that's why you picked Marlowe. Brandon Beane said he went through 10 safeties. There's got to be a little bit better, higher end names on the list, I'm just going to assume, than Marlowe on the higher end. But I think the reason, beside the 7th round compensation, was the fact that he knows the defense. And this is the reason that you picked him maybe over potentially higher names on the list. So I think he should. Will McDermott do it? I don't know. I don't think Jaquan Johnson should be on the field in defense. And I even heard inside of practice from someone I trust that Cam Lewis was getting first team safety snaps. Does
that would be interesting.
I don't believe so, but I have heard that he has been getting first team safety reps by people I trust.
Interesting little tidbit, if you don't mind. If that happens, I'm going to clip that and put it on social. If it doesn't happen, I'm going to just edit this out of the video entirely. But that's an interesting one.
That's more than fine. But yeah, I have heard that they practiced him there. It doesn't mean he's going to start there or play there. Just like, I think it was the tell I got last year against KC when he was actually starting in the slot. And that actually came to fruition against KC. He did end up getting hurt in like the second quarter after playing pretty well that first half. But the tell there was they're very versatile with Cam Lewis, and he was very easy to inactivate with all the DBs they could have had potentially ready. So I don't know. It is an interesting thing to keep an eye on, that if at some point in this game that Jaquan Johnson's not getting it done, you may see some Cam Lewis, because they for certainty they are practicing him with ones. And
as a UB grad, and I believe you're a UB grad as well, always rooting for Cam Lewis. Looking at the Minnesota Vikings inactive list, and we're going to get to the specifics of sort of how some of these injuries affect them when we get to talking about their defense, but Cam Dantzler does not show up on the inactive list because he was placed on injured reserve. That's one of their starting corners out for this football game. And then obviously a huge loss in the middle of that defense in Dalvin Tomlinson along the defensive line. That's going to be huge when we start to talk about the Buffalo Bills and utilizing the running game today. Dalvin Tomlinson's going to be a big injury for them. But before we start talking about the Buffalo Bills offense and how it matches up against the Minnesota Vikings defense, this show is presented by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. Hand-cut cup and char pepperonis. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like me, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it is just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. Damn, I could use some Picasso's pizza right now. That just picture just looks so good. Living out here in the desert, the only pizza I can eat out here is wood fire pizza. Everything else is trash. But
I love wood fire.
all right. So, and the thing is, like in Buffalo, like wood fire is like a nice like reprieve. Like it's a nice like little switch up. Here it's the go-to. So yeah, it's a little different out here in the desert. But let's transition now to the Buffalo Bills offense versus the Minnesota Vikings defense. Obviously, the biggest fear an opponent has when facing the Minnesota Vikings, it's Danielle Hunter and it's Zadarius Smith on the outside. Their defensive line in between them, it's going to be James Lynch in place of Tomlinson, former Buffalo Bill Harrison Phillips playing the nose, and Jonathan Bullard. Him and Ross Blaylock have sort of resurrected their career along that Minnesota D line. Kyrie's Tonga as well. A lot of guys who I loved pre-draft who sort of washed with their first team have found a home in Minnesota on that defense this year. At linebacker, they got two solid ones in Jordan Hicks and Eric Kendricks. And then the secondary is where it gets a little iffy. Patrick Peterson is getting up there in age. Caleb Evans, they got Shannon Sullivan in the nickel, and then they got Cam Bynum and Harrison Smith, who on paper they're good safeties, but Harrison Smith is getting a little long in the tooth. He's not what he used to be. It looks like the Bills receivers could get some favorable matchups this week, but it's going to be tough to hold the ball for a very long time with Hunter and Smith blitzing, and that's what Minnesota Vikings defense is counting on. Looking at this Buffalo Bills offense today, still not knowing who the quarterback is going to be and whether it's a healthy Keenum or an injured Allen, you got to expect that the Buffalo Bills need to fix the short to intermediate passing game, and they need some effectiveness from the slot position. Allen's numbers are down in the intermediate range from 2021 to 2022. The common denominator, to me at least, is the loss of Cole Beasley. And this intermediate passing game is what's used to, and the slot is what's used to open things up for guys like Gabriel Davis and Stefon Diggs down the field. It makes it easier on the boundaries when you have sort of some go-to guys in the slot. So what are your thoughts on the Bills slot production, and how do we fix it? Because that might be one of the keys to the game today.
It's been poor, straight up. We, could agree or disagree with Beasley on or off the field. That's up for you to determine how you, like him as a person or not after especially 2020. But to me, he was productive on the field. He had 100+ targets. You can't just replace that you can't just throw it at McKenzie. You can't just throw it on the wall and hope it sticks. To me, that was a huge gap, and you're seeing it late in games. You saw it against Miami when they could have used that presence. They went to McKenzie. That play never happened. They struggled against the Jets with teams that are dropping. And that's where you need to have him in between the second, right around the second level. You need to get it over the linebackers and in front of the safeties. And that's where Beasley was great. And on top of it, he could alleviate some of those pressure situations that you could have used last week against the Jets. So it is a big hole. And I think that's where, now that we know the inactive list, where Duke Johnson comes in, I do think that you see him in the slot. I think that when they first traded for Nyheim Hines, the first thing Brandon Beane said, slot receiver. I think that now that he's been able to be implemented into the offense, when he came in, all the implementation happens on a Monday. And it's as funny as it sounds, even on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, it's too late. That's why he only had four scripted plays, wasn't able to really corral any of them. But I do think you see a lot more of that this week. I don't think that it's going to stay around 4. I think that you'll see him in the slot. He's dominant in there. And I think that you see some screens to him as well. So I'd like to see him matched up with linebackers and Shandon Sullivan and dominate. That's my solution, is that Duke Johnson, some form of Nyheim Hines, as well as I think that Khalil Shakir is one of the best route runners on the team. I think you need to utilize him now that you know what he is. He has ability with Jamison Crowder out. I think that they thought that would alleviate some of their issues as well. He's always been injured, especially lately. It didn't. Yeah. And then like a totally different topic for a different day is I still think that they're pretty much in the running for OBJ and that they anticipate him being the boost for their third receiver that they're looking for. But I think that that's the plan as of today.
The Jamison Crowder injury is interesting because he was struggling. Like, he wasn't playing well. I think it was taking him a while to adjust to this Buffalo Bills offense. But I do think that if Jamison Crowder was healthy, they would have pivoted to him as the go-to slot by now. And I think that they would have given him an immense run in the slot position. And we wouldn't be talking about why isn't Khalil Shakir playing over Isaiah McKenzie. But it's also frustrating because We saw what Khalil Shakir is capable of in the preseason. We've seen what Khalil Shakir is capable of when targeted in the regular season. So obviously we don't know the ins and outs. We're not seeing what Khalil Shakir is doing sort of on routes when he's not targeted. We're not seeing what's going on in practice every week. We do not know how much of the playbook he does or does not comprehend. We're not privy to a lot of that stuff. So, the coaches see things that we don't, but Isaiah McKenzie is still getting a more significant run in the slot than Khalil Shakir. And that's frustrating because, no offense, unless teams are playing man-to-man defense, which they rarely are, he is nowhere in the stratosphere of Cole Beasley as a wide receiver. He's more of a gadget fourth or fifth guy who you'd wish could handle the ball a little bit better on special teams to justify rostering a guy like that on game day. But I like to see more Khalil Shakir today. I'd like to see Khalil Shakir out-snap Isaiah McKenzie. You mentioned Naheem Hines, Duke Johnson, James Cook. Whatever it takes, the Buffalo Bills need to find something in the slot. And it's clear to me that Josh Allen maybe just doesn't trust these dudes over the middle of the football field. The only production we're getting from the slot is Stefon Diggs. I mean, looking at Josh Allen's average depth of target by week 1 in LA, 7.4 yards, Tennessee, 8.9, Miami, 5.9, Baltimore, 7.4 yard EPA, or I'm sorry, average depth of target. Then comes the Pittsburgh game. We all know the Pittsburgh game. 14.9 average depth of target. And since then, it was 8.1 versus Kansas City, 14 versus Green Bay, 12.1 versus the New York Jets. That number needs to come down, and it likely will today based on weather, based on Allen's injury, etc. And Allen just needs to take some of the other underneath stuff. Dan Orlovsky and Ryan Clark did a really good breakdown this week of when Josh Allen tried to fit one into bracketed coverage over the middle of the field to Khalil Shakir, almost picked off. Josh Allen currently leads the league right now, I believe, according to PFF, in dropped interceptions this year, on top of interceptions. When he had Dawson Knox and he had James Cook underneath that he could have dumped the ball off to. It might have been Devin Singletary. But that number needs to come down, and I'm trying to think of why Allen isn't taking this stuff, why he's doing this hero ball stuff again. And there are two things I come back to. Number one, he doesn't trust the guys underneath. Or number two, I think there could be a Ken Dorsey effect. And I'm not saying Ken Dorsey's calling bad plays, but we talk again and again about how aggressive Ken Dorsey is. Is Ken Dorsey's aggressiveness rubbing off on Josh Allen? Is it playing into Josh Allen's sort of worst tendencies? I feel like a guy like Brian Daboll would have chewed Josh's ass out by now over this average depth of target and the fact that he's looking for shot plays almost every single play. I don't know if Ken Dorsey has really chewed his ass out over something like that. And I think it shows in the average depth of target per week. What do you think is the reason why the Bills are trying to push the ball so far down the field, despite bracketed coverages, despite split safeties, when there is stuff underneath for them to hit?
Good news to start this segment, at least. Josh Allen's on the field with Mitch Morse, with the ones, as expected. This was, so 12:20 was right about what I thought. That's when the offense comes back on. This would have been worry time to actually start talking about a Case Keenum game. But he was probably receiving treatments, like we said. He's with the ones. As anticipated, the Bills did really good job of controlling the near. I'm still going to say I don't know that it's intentional. I think that his plan was to always receive treatment at this time and then come on for the final stages of warmups. I still don't know that Sean McDermott's thinking that they're going to fool the Vikings today. I don't know that that's necessarily, but I think that the issue with Josh Allen is I think he's pressing once he realized he's MVP 1. I think he's pressing. I think he's going and saying, let's get some. Look at to start the game against the Jets. He goes right after Sauce Gardner and says, I'm better than you. Like, my receiver's better than you. We're going to catch you and we're going to go deep. And I think that that's quite frankly a situation for him playing a little hero ball, but pressing a little bit because the team's record's good. He wants to pad the stats. He doesn't want to be known as I can't beat the shell. I can only throw short. But I think he's going to have to learn that today, that he's going to have to take what he's getting. Plays a 2-man game. So I do think that there's a little bit on Dorsey for not incorporating enough 2-man game. I think that that's quite frankly, he's not getting the tight ends involved. He's struggling in the red zone. So I do think that it is for as good as he started the season, I do think that there is definitely some Ken Dorsey warts that we're all working out, both as a team and trying to figure out what they're thinking. But it comes down to them they're going to start mashing different slot receivers today until they find one they think works. And if it's James Cook, if it's Nyheim Hines, if it's Duke Johnson looks like he's in the ones right now, by the way, just as a little tidbit in warmups, as well as it looks like
what is going on?
James Cook looks like he's practicing in the slot. So just some early notes at 12:20 from the field.
Just sign OBJ. What are we doing here?
I think that they think that they are. Everything we've heard, and Von Miller tripled down on it today on a podcast.
They're running backs at slot receiver right now. Like they're using Hines and Cook. Like it seems like today we're going to see Hines and Cook like almost exclusively as a receiver from like all the tea leaves on
Johnson running back. Exactly.
That's so weird. Just go out and get OBJ. Like the Bills, clearly that was a miss this offseason if that's their game plan. And I don't know what that says about Khalil Shakir and what he's doing in practice. I mean, woof. EB says aggressive Josh Allen is okay in my book. I'm okay with it too. Like, don't get me wrong, but also you got to balance the aggressiveness with also just taking what the defense gives you. You can't be aggressive on every single play, especially not in the National Football League, especially not with the way teams defend you. He leads the league. In combined interceptions, dropped interceptions with 14 per PFF. So clearly that needs to come down. You can't turn the ball over. You could argue those turnovers probably cost us the game last week against the New York Jets. You just can't do it.
No.
So if you're Josh, instead of throwing it to bracketed coverage on 2nd and 14, maybe dump the ball off to Dawson Knox or Devin Singletary for 8 yards and make it 3rd and 5 instead. Like you got to make those better decisions if you're Josh Allen. And I'm not trying to scapegoat Ken Dorsey or make excuses for Josh Allen. It's 100% on him at the end of the day. I'm just trying to figure out what's feeding into him doing this all of a sudden when he was doing such a good job early in the season. And he was doing a really good job last season. Roy Collins comes in and says aggressive, not careless. And I really agree with that statement right there. All right. Every week we talk about the running game and we talk about how the Buffalo Bills, I think the Buffalo Bills need to run the ball more. Is always sort of like an overdone narrative. Oh, the Buffalo Bills need to find a balance. Like, no, they don't. Like Josh Allen's your quarterback. You want this offense to be Josh Allen centric. You want to utilize the fact that he's one of the best players in the National Football League. You want to use all that to your advantage. You just want a more of an effective running game. But the combination of the Allen injury and the combination of the weather, I think that you do need to find more of a balance volume-wise in the running game today if you're the Buffalo Bills, and you got to get the running game going, whether it's more 12 personnel or 21 personnel. I'd love to see some more Reggie Gilliam, who's seemingly gone away the last couple of weeks, I feel like, but the gap run percentage for the Bills has increased mightily over the last few weeks, which is their go-to when they struggle. The Vikings lead the league with 73% light boxes. They're 4th most in the NFL with 29% light boxes versus the run. They're 2nd most in the NFL with 73% two deep shells. So it'll be interesting to see if, one, the Vikings change the way they scheme their defense based on an injured Allen and the weather. And it seems like this would be a game where the Buffalo Bills need to find a volume balance and establish the run. Do you agree with that? Or is this another case of they just got to run the ball more effectively, not more?
I've always been on the camp of they need to run the ball more effectively, not more. I think that that's when they're at their best. The effective runs, when they have effective runs, it opens everything up on the field. I can't sit here and say maybe today with the circumstance, the situation with running the ball more, that could be, I'd buy into that today. As a whole, though, I don't want more running. I think that, they can't even figure out a running back. They're playing Duke Johnson in running back 1 snaps. If he's their running back 1 or even running back 2, they need to elevate him. They need to stop playing games. And not, I mean, if he plays at all well today, what other, team's not going to want to claim him for free, with a vet minimum deal. So I think that they're being interesting with the position. They've been wanting to upgrade running back for a long time now. They've been, being even admitted to being on McCaffrey. He's drafted a couple with early day 2 picks. He went after Hines. Yeah. At some point, the Bills are trying to find a running back that fits what they're trying to do. That's just too many lottery tickets to me that says that they're just doing it randomly. They're trying to find a running back, and until they have one that they really trust, I don't know that we can sit and pound the rock all game, but at the same time, I think these running backs are active to see who has a hot hand, as well as short passes today. short passes to get the running game going as an extension of the running game. I think that that's really where you see these guys work, and whatever one maybe fits the elements slash against their defense, I think you'll start to see ramp in the second half to where maybe Cook doesn't play as much. You see all Hines or vice versa, or some variation of all Duke Johnson. I would not be shocked in the second half if it's an exclusive running back that we not necessarily pounding today.
Yeah, and you mentioned, all the investments we've made in running back or attempted to make in running back too. There was smoke around Travis Etienne a couple of years ago, and there was smoke around Breece Hall. So clearly the Buffalo Bills are still looking for a fit. They keep throwing darts at the board to see what sticks. The one thing, and this is more of the fan in me than sort of the analyst, you had the Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey trade chatter. James Cook has a really good game. Then you have the Nyheim Hines trade, and James Cook has another really good game. So maybe the Duke Johnson elevation will completely put James Cook into a different stratosphere this week.
It's a human element.
It's a human element. Yeah. So another thing I think the Buffalo Bills need to do better is they need to score points in the red zone. The Bills offense is 28th in red zone DVA, 24th in the pass, 28th in the run, but the Minnesota Vikings defense, 32nd in red zone DVA, 32nd against the pass, 32nd against the run. It's bad versus bad in the red zone today in Orchard Park. The Bills have to get back on track in the red zone and take advantage of this Vikings poor red zone defense, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on the Bills' red zone struggles, and can they get it back on track today against the league's worst red zone defense?
I think that that's potentially why you see the running backs as well. I think the red zone was always a target to get better. I mean, you're hovering around 50% conversion, 19th in the league there, and just strictly percentages. You've read the DVOAs. Those aren't great. So I do think that part of what's going on today is to be better in the red zone. They need to capitalize. And if they were better in the red zone against the Jets, they win that game even playing poorly. Josh Allen can't miss a guy dropping off to cover Dawson Knox there. And then later in the game, he missed Gabe Davis on potentially Gabe ran the wrong route. That's a conversation for a different day. What's going on at receiver 2, as we focused a lot today on receiver 3 right now. But I do think the red zone is an issue. And I think that they're coming up with some things. And that's why you see Duke Johnson. I think he's going to be there to both help pass block as well as come up and be creative. I wouldn't be shocked with a Duke Johnson red zone touchdown today, just due to the fact that I don't know what the Vikings are going to have on him. They're not going to know what they're going to run with Duke Johnson on the field. I do think that if there's any gamesmanship, it wasn't with the Josh Allen treatment. It might be with what are they going to do with all these running backs? I think that that's more the gamesmanship today. And which ones are they? Who are they going to do what with? I don't think the Vikings have an answer for that. And I think the Bills have a unique advantage, at least today, to show a different slot look, to show a different short passing game look. And I think you see that early and often. And then what happens when the Vikings start to come up to press that, I do think you'll be able to see Josh Allen finally hit those aggressive throws that he can hit. So I think that's the extension that you're looking for today. I think you're going to see the Vikings try to bring up and press him. And if they go man-to-man at any point, or they try to bring pressure, I think that that's what the Bills are hoping for, and that they're able to dominate with Diggs going one-on-one with Patrick Peterson.
Yeah, Patrick Peterson is not what he used to be. If we can get some mano-a-mano, man-on-man looks. He was a little motivated a couple of weeks ago against Arizona, but the Buffalo Bills have never done Patrick Peterson dirty. I don't know if they passed on him in the draft that year. I can't remember back that far, but I don't think the Buffalo Bills have ever done anything dirty to Patrick Peterson. So when you get to that age, someone needs to do you wrong in order for you to step up.
They say he doesn't even shadow the one, though.
Yeah. But I mean, it'll be interesting. He might today without Cam Dantzler. I mean, it's Shannon Sullivan, who typically plays in the slot, and it's a Caleb Evans, the rookie out of Missouri, unless they play Duke Shelley, who they called up from the practice squad. So that'll be interesting. Again, I mentioned the stat twice now. Josh Allen leads the league in combined interceptions and dropped interceptions, 14 per PFF. We cannot turn the ball over today. If you want to beat a team on a 6-game winning streak who's 7-1, who has all the weapons they do on offense, you cannot turn the ball over today. What are your thoughts on the Bills being a little reckless with the football this season?
I think that back to the original conversation of the aggressiveness and Josh going out and trying to win an MVP and being aggressive, noticing he's on different pages, as mentioned with Gabe Davis at times, quite frankly, threw a dime to at least tie the game last week. That there's no way we can talk about how good Sauce plays or didn't play. That's brutal. That's a pass that should be completed in the game. And that aggressive nature, I think is going to help Josh Allen, but the interceptable passes, but I don't think that those poor reads are going to happen the entire season. I don't think he's going to miss a dropping linebacker / throw it to Whitehead in the red zone much. So I do think that they'll clean it up. I think that's where the short passing game is going to come in today. I think there's going to be a focus on ball security, especially right now against a team that, quite frankly, has won 6 straight 1-score games. We know about regression to the mean in this category from 2020 to 2021. At some point, the DVOA is going to catch up to the Vikings. They're only having 4 projected wins right now based on all their DVOA metrics. They've far exceeded that with multiple wins that their metrics don't point to. At some point, that's going to catch up to them.
Looking at some, just to close out the offense here, obviously the offensive line versus Zadarius Smith and Daniel Hunter is going to be something to keep an eye on over the course of the entire game. Minnesota likes to, blitz the A gap, get them, pass rushing from the interior. They obviously like to get them working from the outside as well. They like to get them pressuring the quarterback in a number of ways, and they're both really good at it. And we talked a bunch about the running game in the slot today. And if the Buffalo Bills can get the running game going, they can get the slot going, and they can pass protect against Smith and Hunter effectively. I think that makes life a lot easier for a weak secondary for Stefon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. Obviously, Stefon Diggs doesn't need to get back on track. He just needs to keep doing what he's doing. But for Gabriel Davis to get back on track, the opportunity is there for both of them today. But a lot of other things need to go right, or else Josh Allen's not going to have the time to get those two guys the football. And if Minnesota can drop back into these 2 deep shells and they can get pressure with 4, it's going to be very, very hard for Josh Allen to do that. But what are your closing thoughts both on Smith, Hunter, their effect on this game, and our number 1 and number 2 receivers, Stefon Diggs and Gabriel Davis, who we haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
I think they're game wreckers. I think that's the number one thing you're scheming for. You always talk about, whether it's Bill Belichick or even Sean McDermott, you're talking about taking away their best players. And on the Vikings, that's their best players, especially on defense, but that's not saying too much. I would go as far as saying Justin Jefferson aside, they're their best players. So I think the Bills will have an answer with the cover 2 shell. They'll be able to keep Jefferson in check a little bit, at least what they would consider in check, short passes in front of them. That's how the Bills play even lesser receivers. But when it comes to their playmaking defensive ends and pass rushers, I think they're going to give extra help. It's interesting that they went with the extra running backs over maybe a blocker like Tommy Sweeney, who was able to spring Josh Allen for that deep throw to Gabriel Davis against the Steelers. So fairly good blocking tight end. So I think that they're planning on more short passes, chips. They're going to max protect at times. The 6th offensive lineman, Bobby Hart, you'll see plenty today, I think. So I think that's a matter of, I think that's the key to the game is keeping those 2 in check. I think Deion Dawkins can hold his own most of the game. We'll see what they do on the right side of the offensive line with Spencer Brown in these situations. But stopping them is key to this game. I think that if you're able to keep them at bay, limit it to limited pressures, I think that bodes well for the Bills offense and might equal W. And when it comes to the receivers, I just think Gabe Davis needs to, we saw the video of him clamping the football and it was ugly. It's kind of what you learn in Pee Wee not to do. But those are some of his draft warts on why he might have fallen to the 4th round. As he was told, he was a droppable receiver who only ran fly routes. And at times you see a little bit of that. So I want to see what he's able to do more. And I think that's why Diggs is always going to get his. I think he's going to beat some of the best corners in the league. I don't think he faces a premier guy today. I think that you'll be able to get him his ball and get him his. And then I think that Gabriel Davis might have a winnable matchup depending on how they rotate their cornerbacks. If he is against Evans or how that looks, I think that that's a winnable matchup for Gabe Davis, and maybe one that Josh Allen's like, let's get Gabe Davis going today in a matchup without, Dantzler's been good. So
Caleb Evans is a bigger corner too. So that doesn't bode as well for Gabriel Davis, but he is young and he was a mid-round pick as opposed to an early pick for a reason. So you're right there. The one thing I said this week about Gabriel Davis, I said a couple things about Gabriel Davis. I always judge him for some reason. It's so weird. And you can maybe comment on this. Whenever I judge Gabriel Davis, I always find myself asking after the game, did he remind me more of Jordy Nelson or did he remind me more of Alan Lazard? I always ask myself that question. I don't know why.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Can I tell you who the first team safety is?
Who is the first team safety?
It's Cam Lewis.
Ooh. Is that for being reported by someone?
Yeah, Matt Perino, Cam Lewis running with the first team defense at strong safety.
This is going to be fun. We're about to get to defense in a second. And then the other thing that I said about Gabriel Davis this week, we talked this season about, is Gabriel Davis like a 1B to Stefon Diggs is 1A? And I think he is a 1B, or he can be a 1B when everything's clicking and everything's going right. But he needs Stefon Diggs to put up number 1 numbers. he reminds me a little bit of Peerless Price, not in playing style or anything like that, but he's a dominant number 2 wide receiver, I think, in the National Football League, or he has the ability to be a dominant number 2 if the other pieces are around him, like a Stefon Diggs and a Cole Beasley or another, effective slot option. Gabriel Davis is an absolute stud, an absolute weapon, but I think like if his contract comes up and the Buffalo Bills can't afford to re-sign him and he goes somewhere else and he's asked to be the wide receiver number 1, I think you're going to see his numbers fall off a cliff. I do think that he plays a vital role. He's a huge weapon. He's a huge part of our offense, but I do think he's kind of Peerless Price in the fact that if he's not the number 2, if everyone's focusing their sole attention on him, he's not capable, like I think Stefon Diggs, of just getting open in every single way possible and being that alpha number 1 receiver. But you get him cooking, you get him open. We've seen a ton how big and effective of a weapon he can be.
He can be.
So now transitioning to defense with Cam Lewis starting at strong safety for the Buffalo Bills today. Von Miller, Shaq Lawson, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, they'll be rotating at the edge. Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Jordan Phillips, Tim Settle, they'll be rotating along the interior. Edmonds is starting. Who knows if he plays the full game? If he doesn't, Tyrell Dodson will come in. Matt Milano is back this week. You're likely going to see Dane Jackson, Christian Benford on the boundaries, Xavier Rhodes if needed. And we've seen corners getting banged up on a weekly basis. So Xavier Rhodes might be needed. Then you have Teron Johnson in the nickel. And then it appears like it's going to be Cam Lewis and DeMar Hamlin at safety today for the Buffalo Bills, going up against Kirk Cousins, Dalvin Cook, Alexander Madison, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Jalen Reagor, KJ Osborne, TJ Hawkinson. Johnny Munt has made some plays for them, especially in the red zone. Nick Muse is active today off the practice squad as their third tight end. Might give you an indicator that the Vikings plan on running the ball a little bit since they've activated 3 tight ends. They've got CJ Ham. And then their offensive line has been solid this year. Christian Darrisaw is really coming into his own. Could possibly be an all-pro this year. Brian O'Neill is a quality starting right tackle. Garrett Bradbury is a quality starting center. And then Ed Ingram, a high draft pick, and Ezra Cleveland, a high draft pick. The Minnesota Vikings have invested heavily draft-wise in their offensive line. And unlike teams like Miami, those draft picks are hitting for them. So the Minnesota Vikings have a very, very capable offense. What is just your initial thoughts? You're Leslie Frazier. You're going up against Kevin O'Connell, this Sean McVay disciple. Maybe we see a lot of what we saw against the Rams, but quite frankly, there's more weapons here than the Rams had. What's the key to stopping this Vikings offense with so many weapons?
I think that's the one thing I'm comfortable with of this whole situation here that we're facing today, is the cover 2 shell that just quite frankly baffles Kirk Cousins. I think that that's key in this situation, is not letting one particular weapon beat you. I think it's making sure Justin Jefferson doesn't annihilate your defense. I think at the same time, they're going with Cam Lewis for pass coverage ability. So that's a little tell. And also AJ Epinesa is starting. So I think it's a little tell that they're expecting pass, especially with Cam Lewis. And I think that that's a tell that they're looking for stronger coverage and stronger pass rush ability. And Cam Lewis is going to be in there to make sure that there's better coverage on the field than what Jaquan Johnson was able to do, even though Jaquan came up and run and struggled. So I think that's going to be a really interesting situation that the Bills feel really comfortable with their scheme. One of their bigger plays last week with the Jets came with Taron Johnson coming out of the game for a play and Saran Neal coming in there. Zach Wilson immediately checking to the slot and hitting Wilson for 30 yards down the seam. So I think that outside of that lapse, the defense played pretty well, especially against the pass. They played fairly well. And if they tackle better, which should be something they're able to correct easily, not something that takes years, that they should be able to be better against the run, because there was some good things on run. Bernard showed some good things. Obviously, he's not playing today, but the linebacker room's upgraded. I think that you see a lot. I think the defensive scheme is going to win today. It's going to win this ball game. If they don't, it's going to be a long day. They're going to control the ball. It's going to be similar to the Jets. But I think that the Bills scheme will be ready defensively, especially with their starting linebackers. And they saw something with Cam Lewis, like, hey, tune into the air raid hour. Look at that. We broke this for you before it broke. That the Bills were looking at something with Cam Lewis, in particular to the Vikings and cover 2 shell, and maybe that extra corner at nature is going to really baffle Kirk Cousins.
And Roy Collins coming in saying, are you confident in Cam Lewis? My one concern with Cam Lewis would be the size and him playing at the line of scrimmage, but you sort of hit on this. Kirk Cousins struggles versus those two deep shells. The Buffalo Bills played a ton of two deep shells against the LA Rams. Now the Vikings running game scares me more than LA's does, but expect a lot of Cam Lewis to be playing back and a lot of two deep shells. I don't expect to see a ton of Cam Lewis at the line of scrimmage like you would in some other games. So that should be really, really interesting. I mean, I'm not saying Cam Lewis is never going to be at the line of scrimmage. He's played nickel before, so he's definitely capable of it. But I think if you were playing a team like the New York Jets, where they're going to be running heavy and they're going to be using a lot of man gap power, I don't know if you're seeing Cam Lewis start at strong safety, a team that zone runs a lot and a team that passes the ball and has the weapons they do, and a quarterback that struggles in that two deep shell. I think you see a more maybe guy who could drop back into center field like a Cam Lewis. So this should be super interesting to see here. The Vikings, 79% zone run team. That's their identity. The last 2 weeks, the Bills have been absolutely manhandled by gap runs. At first, it was Matt LaFleur figured us out in the second half of that game. Then he whispered what to do into his brother's ear, and his brother killed us with it the next week. Mike LaFleur calling plays for the New York Jets. It was that misdirection. It was that gap running scheme. Do the Vikings switch it up this week, or do they stick with their bread and butter and continue on with that zone run, which might be an advantage for the Buffalo Bills, despite the fact that they have Delvin and Madison, who are very good running backs?
They should switch it up. That's the answer. Do they? I don't know enough about them coaching style and stylistically. Will they? I mean, you absolutely do.
If O'Connell is anything like McVay, my guess is he sticks to his bread and butter.
Then great. It's great news in this game and week, right now today. That's great news for the Buffalo Bills in this situation, because you just mentioned it. Coaches are stubborn. And even McDermott to an extent with his defense. He was saying we're running Taron Johnson. We're running our base. Taron Johnson's a good tackler. We don't care to bring in another linebacker. I mean, they've shown the propensity to stick with their game plan and have it work out for the most part. So if that's the case, advantage Bills. You saw that earlier in the year where the Bills are able to stop similar types of running games. So that's definitely a good situation. And maybe the Bills feel the same. And that's why they decided to stylistically make sure that their passing game is buttoned up and going with a strong safety like Cam Lewis for a game to see if he's the potential starter for the rest of the year or not. So it's very interesting that I think the Bills agree. And I think that's why potentially they're thinking about coverage. And with Hawkinson, all the names you've already mentioned on the show, they need to make sure that that's buttoned up quickly, especially without Elam or White. And have we heard if it's Benford starting? Is that anywhere? Or
I mean, I would
Rhodes,
doubt,
right?
I would doubt it. Xavier Rhodes.
Okay.
My guess is it's going to be Christian Benford. I haven't seen it reported anywhere.
Okay.
But that's just my general assumption.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it anywhere either, but
yeah.
So I just hadn't seen either way. So I'm assuming it's Benford, but anyways, yeah, I think stylistically the Bills feel comfortable in coverage, and that's where they're focusing this week. So I think that they're agreeing that I don't believe that they are going to change their running scheme so quickly for a 1 week basis. And even if they do, are they good at it? Right? Can they effectively be good at? I think so. They should be able to. But like you said, coaches don't go away from their bread and butter.
All right. How do you contain Justin Jefferson? Obviously, that's the big name, all-pro caliber wide receiver, drafted with the first-round pick we gave them in the Stefon Diggs deal. How do you contain a guy like Justin Jefferson, especially when you have other guys to worry about, like TJ Hawkinson, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook? How do you contain a Justin Jefferson?
I think you do the best that you can and keep him in front of you. I mean, the Bills are pretty good at that. Will they shade over Cam Lewis? I don't know. What's the scenario with Justin Jefferson? I think that they kind of feel like if their game plans to throw to Justin Jefferson in subpar elements with their cover 2 shell, then let them. And they're not going to get beat deep. So if they're going to consistently throw that way, Kirk Cousins makes a mistake. I think that's what I'll get sack, fumble, interception. I think that's what they're hoping for. And at the same time, do they care if just Justin Jefferson goes for 70 to 95 yards? Probably not. But I think that their goal is they'll probably shade coverage that way and continue to keep it that way. And if others are beating them, then maybe they pull that off. So to me, I think they try their best to take over and take out Justin Jefferson, but keep him in front of them. He's going to have a cover 2 look. I don't think he's going to have a ton of space to run free. I think the Vikings are going to have to get it to him early and often and quick routes and have him break something similar to how the Jets used Garrett Wilson. So we'll see how that turns out. But I don't think you can. He is one of those top 3 to 5 receivers where I don't know that you can take him out of the game. But you can certainly, shade coverage, make sure that no one's getting beat deep, and do the best that you can to not get burned like you did against Jalen Waddle in week 3 against Miami.
For sure. Looking at special teams here, obviously the Bills, Tyler Bass, Sam Martin. The return game is kind of a question mark. Is it going to be Isaiah McKenzie on kick returns? Is it going to be Duke Johnson? Is it going to be Naheem Hines on punt returns? Is it going to be Duke Johnson? So that's something to keep an eye on for the Vikings. A little more secure in their special teams. They've got Greg Joseph. They've got Ryan Wright kicking and punting. Then their kick return is typically done by Nguanu, the running back, and their punt returning is typically done by Jalen Reagor, the wide receiver. So they're pretty settled there. But it's sort of an even split on special teams, at least in the kicking, punting, and return units, in my opinion. Obviously, the Vikings struggle a little bit of DVOA and special teams, but a lot of that is because they're 32nd at home. They're better on the road, which is really, really weird since they play in a dome. But
weird.
I don't think special teams. I mean, it could be. It only takes one play. I don't think special teams. Maybe it does in this weather. But to me, looking at it, it seems like a pretty even matchup. I'm not willing to make some bold prediction that a special teams play is going to make or break this game, but it only takes one play. It only takes one play. So a little longer on our sort of pregame chit chat back and forth because of because of everything to talk about this game. I mean, there was just so much to talk about this game. So we're going to get into our pregame superlatives, but I'm going to do it without the video. So I'm going to do it without the videos today for time's sake. So we're going to hit up our pregame superlatives like we do every single week. I've got my predictions here. Kevin's got his predictions here. And obviously we want your guys' prediction in the comment section as well. And let's start with the take me higher player of the game, the star player other than Josh Allen, who has to step up for the Bills to win.
It's got to be. I'm going to go off the cuff, Dawson Knox.
I like it.
I like Dawson Knox. I think that everything we talked about on the show today, a short passing game, getting the ball out quick. Let's not expose him to hits, even though everything research, at least I think that I've read, has said that there is not a real risk of re-injury. He needs to have an arm extended and a direct shot on his arm to even equal any sort of direct hit. So I think the Bills want to get it out and even, and they need to find room in the red zone for Dawson Knox. They tried it against the Jets, Josh. I don't know what happened. Wasn't a good read. The play was covered, but to me, got to take me higher with Dawson Knox. I think he's key to this game. I think that getting him going potentially in a situation to where they might be keying on other things today from the Minnesota defense. I think there's going to be space in the middle of that Minnesota defense, and the DVOA would prove it.
We got Brendan P coming in and says, I need Ed Oliver to take me higher. I agree with that. I think if you're going to beat the Minnesota Vikings, you need to pressure them with 4, and Ed Oliver is a big part of that. I picked the Buffalo Bills defensive line the last 2 weeks, and the Buffalo Bills defensive line has let me down the last 2 weeks. So I'm not going to go with the Buffalo Bills defensive line this week. That's the fan in me needing to change the mojo around it, even though I think the defensive line for the Bills might be the most important aspect of this game. But I'm going to go with Leslie Frazier. And I'm just going to say that Leslie Frazier needs to scheme up a way to hold the Minnesota Vikings under 20 points, and the Buffalo Bills offense needs to find a way to score more than 20 points in this weather at home. I think he's capable of doing that. How he goes about doing that, those 2 deep shells, the defensive line, making sure that they're filling the gaps, doing what they need to do to stop the run game. I need Leslie Frazier to step up, call a good game, put the right backups in where the right backups need to go with all of these injuries. So I'm going with Leslie Frazier as my take me higher coach of the game. And offensively, I think Ken Dorsey and figuring out a way to solidify the slot is just as important, but there's just so many question marks around how they're going to go about doing it that I didn't feel comfortable sort of like making a prediction around that. So I'm going to go with Leslie Frazier. Guys like Jordan Phillips, Ed Oliver, Von Miller, they got to have big games today. I think they're a big part of what Leslie Frazier and this defense need to draw up. Next up, wild card player of the game, a surprise player who could affect the outcome of this game. Who are you going with your wild card player of the game?
Man, this is an interesting one. I think that you could go in a multitude of ways with this, like who you might think could affect this game. But I think I'm going to go with Dane Jackson. I think you see a wild card game out of Dane Jackson. I think he's back to your question, how you stop Justin Jefferson. I think Dane Jackson coverage, breaking on the ball, passes defense. I'm not talking about 3 pick sixes. I'm talking about passes defense. I'm talking about keep everything in front of him. If Dane Jackson, back kind of to your point with Leslie Frazier, if Dane Jackson has a good game, the Bills are in good position because that means
Yeah.
they're locking down potentially their receiver one. I'm going with Dane Jackson as my wild card of the game. And you see Dane show out and you see him be able to keep this Minnesota offense at bay.
Mm-hmm. Brendan P comes in and says James Cook, and I am going with Brendan P. I'm going with the storyline today, Dalvin versus James, and my wild card player of the game is James Cook. I'm going to say 100 yards from scrimmage. I'm not going to say 100 rushing yards or 100 receiving yards.
Wow.
100 yards from scrimmage, so a combination of running and passing. I'm going to go all in on James Cook today, and Roy Collins comes in with another good one, Daquan Jones. He's sort of the wild card every week. He's just sort of the backbone of this defense. And then I like this one from Spin. Spencer Brown having a big game against guys like Za'Darius Smith, Danielle Hunter. He would be a huge wild card because, we've seen him get beat by some of these elite edge rushers in the National Football League on occasion this year. And Stephen Printo comes back in and says, Matt Milano. I think he's more of a take me higher than a wild card, but
yeah,
I'll give it to you, Stephen P, because he's coming back from injury. I'll give it to you this week. Up next is our Respect You player of the game. An opposing player the Buffalo Bills need to respect in order to win. Who's your Respect You player of the game? Who's the one player on the Minnesota Vikings Bills just got to respect?
Dalvin Cook. If they can respect and take care of Dalvin Cook, I think that just like the point with Dane Jackson, I think that if they can respect Dalvin, I don't see a lot of ways to victory, especially they have a good game plan against Dalvin. Dane Jackson shows out in his matchup. I don't see a lot of paths to victory for the Vikings. I think that it starts there. Stopping their running game is the number one thing that I want. We've seen it over the last 2 weeks. That's the number one thing I want done and succeeded today. Not even just Cook. Stop their running game in general, but specifically Cook's one of the best running backs in the league. I got to respect him.
And that's a Sean McVay. That's a Sean McVay offense to a T. And obviously Kevin O'Connell runs a lot of those McVay concepts. It's a lot of people like to think of McVay's offense as these like, passing based attacks, but really a lot of what they do is based off of the running game. So I'm with you there. I went with the obvious Danielle Hunter and Za'Darius Smith. If you have, they can wreck an entire game plan. Like that defense outside of those two is average at best, mediocre at best, especially with Dalvin Tomlinson out in the middle of that defense. So if, we get out of this game and Hunter and Smith have been completely like neutered or taken out of this football game, they've been contained. I have a hard time believing that the Buffalo Bills lost this football game because I just don't know if the Vikings have the horses in the secondary to keep up with the Bills receivers. And I don't know outside of those two, if they have the horses on the D line to even stop our not so great running game. So I'm going to go with Hunter and Smith because they just, like I said, they have a chance to wreck the game. And if you could take them out, I think this Minnesota Vikings defense is very, very, very average. Fire sale, our hottest take of the game. What are you going with here for your fire sale?
Similarly to, I guess, your James Cook take is going to be my Hines take. It's going to be my hot take of the day. You're going to see Hines in many situations now that they didn't trade for him for fun. I don't believe they traded for him to be a bell cow running. Kick and punt, bell cow, 40 carry running back. I think that part of the decision today is going to see him take some of those. You saw again with Case Keenum in warmups, taking some slot snaps. I think my prediction is a really good day with Hines that the Vikings have no idea what they're going to get with Hines right now. So I think that that's a pure weapon the Bills can use. And he's the guy that I see going for 6+ catches today. We'll see if that hot take is correct or not.
Yeah. My hot take was also Nyheim Hines based. And I don't know, I might be contradicting myself by predicting that James Cook goes over 100 yards from scrimmage. But my hot take was that Nyheim Hines outsnaps McKenzie and Shakir. He gets more snaps. I'm not willing to make a prediction on his what he does with those snaps, but I'm willing to bet that and maybe what's going on in what we're seeing in warmups is an indicator of this. That Hines and Cook are a big part of what the Buffalo Bills do in the slot today. We see a lot of pony backfields this week as opposed to 11 personnel where the running back then splits out and he becomes the 11 personnel slot guy. So I'm going to say Nyheim Hines outsnaps both Isaiah McKenzie and Khalil Shakir, not combined, but each individual this week. And that brings us to, and we got Bills win by 1 point. I don't know if that's a hot take, especially with all the injuries surrounding the Bills this week and the fact the Vikings had the better record. This one's hot take. I mean, he did 69 yards in the air with that UCL, maybe 70 yards in the air for Josh Allen, 70 air yard pass.
Air yard pass. Wow. That is a hot take. I'll give you that one.
I don't think the weather's going to be too much of a factor. What I saw from the hourly forecast was everything pretty much stops at 1 p.m. So I don't think there's going to be a lot in terms of like rain or snow. And obviously we've seen that the cold, just the straight cold doesn't affect this team. And I haven't had a chance to really look at the wind yet. So the wind is something to keep an eye out for. And I'm sure the broadcast will mention it if it is a factor. Last but not least, our Back to the Future game predictions, our score prediction, plus sort of a brief painting of the picture of what this game is going to look like today. What is your game prediction for today?
I think that I obviously, like everyone else, maybe had to have 2 in the back of my head in this situation. I don't know that I changed it. I mean, I guess I did. I don't know that I changed it drastically, but I've been leaning toward this prediction 30-17 Bills for a while now. I think the cover 2 shell, the DVOA metrics against the Vikings on the road, their defensive struggles. You mentioned their defensive struggles in the red zone. I do think the Bills have a creative game plan after that Jets game. They play very well off of losses, just in general under McDermott. They played very well after losses. I think that they scheme up a really good game plan. Can they keep it going into the Browns game next week? That's what we need to keep an eye on. But I do think that they'll simplify it. They'll do some creative things than possible. Josh won't be aggressive with the nature of the elbow injury. So I think all of that works actually in the Bills' favor. And I just don't think we'll see a bad Josh Allen today. Otherwise, I do think the Bills may have made the decision to play Keenum. So I think that Josh is confident. I think that you see him feast off the energy. I think you see the Bills dominate at home, a dome team that struggles on the road in most metrics. I got 30-17, and it's a prediction that I feel pretty good about. I had 20-17 Bills with a Keenum start.
Yeah, I'm going Bills 27, Vikings 24 in a nail biter. I think Josh leads a game-winning touchdown drive in the fourth quarter. And then the Vikings get the ball back, and the Buffalo Bills defense steps up and prevents Minnesota from getting into field goal range to try and tie it and send it to overtime. So that's my prediction. Bills 27, Vikings 24 in a nail biter. I will never again pick against the Bills because just the rain of fire thrust upon me whenever that happens. I'm never doing it.
You're breaking
again.
their 1 score streak in Minnesota, huh?
So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Kevin, thank you so much. You can catch Kevin every Tuesday, 7 p.m.
7 p.m.
on the Going Deep podcast right here on the Cover One Network. Him and his co-host Mike Bunt, they do a great job every week bringing on somebody to give you sort of a little preview of the opponent we have coming up next, and also giving their takes on the game 2 days after the fact. And the Air Raid Hour will be back. Me and Dave will be back tomorrow in the driver's seat, 9 p.m. Remember to smash that like and share before you head out of here if you have a chance. And don't forget, number 1, the Cover One Buffalo post-game show right after the game. Greg and Aaron will break it all down. And don't forget, there's a new show on the network, Cover One Football Weekly. And I'm actually going to show you guys a little 2-minute preview where they're talking a little bit about Vikings and Bills to close out the show here, to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what Kendall and Anthony Prohaska and Russ Brown bring you guys every single week, breaking down the NFL in general. They talk Bills, they talk other teams as well. So it's a great show. I'm going to play you guys a little tidbit as we close out today instead of our normal outro. But until next time, thank you guys so much in the comment section. Kevin, thank you. And go Bills. You got to go Bills, Kevin.
Go Bills.
There we go. All right. Now a little bit of
I didn't want to ruin your outro.
No, you're good. A little bit of a preview of Cover One college or NFL Football Weekly.
I feel like every year we have this conversation with the Minnesota Vikings in a variety of ways, but they got a new coaching staff, a new scheme. They're using players in different ways, a variety of things. Russ, will start with you. Are the Minnesota Vikings for real?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Kirk Cousins seems to be relatively comfortable in this offense. But no, I mean, Dalvin Cook, if he's healthy, you see how dominant he is. We already know Justin Jefferson, one of the probably 3 best receivers in the National Football League. Jordan Hicks in the middle of that defense, Eric Kendricks, those guys bang at linebackers, man. And they've got Harrison Smith still back there. Zadarius Smith, who they've added. He's been kind of that presence off the edge with Daniil Hunter.
Like, this offense is very, very legit. And if they can put up points, if they can put up like upper 20s, lower 30s or above whatever, they're always going to be in games, and it's going to come down to that defense to kind of keep them ahead in those games. Because, I mean, you look on offense, the playmakers, like Irv Smith coming into the fold is massive.
Kind of unfair.
Giving another passing attack or option in that passing attack on top of Jefferson, Thielen, Osborne.
On top of a really good running game with Dalvin Cook. They have a sick run game.
Darrisaw's coming into their own. They just drafted Ed Ingram. Obviously, this is a passing league. You have to be able to stop the pass. They have the pass rush up front, but do they have the horses on the back end to keep everything, top down?
That's what I wonder. Like, how does this back end hold up? Because, exactly like Russ mentioned, Kendricks has legitimately been one of the best linebackers in football. What can they be on the back end? Like, how close to all-pro Harrison Smith is Harrison Smith right now, and can he be? How much is left in the tank for Patrick Peterson, or the ghost or the shell of Patrick Peterson? All you have to do is just find a way to get some turnovers or create some negative plays. This Vikings offense regularly should put up close to 30 every week.
Are we having fun yet?